All right, joining me now is Eddie Scarry. He's the author of Privileged Victims, How America's Culture Fascists Hijacked the Country and Elevated Its Worst People. Thanks for joining us, Eddie. How you doing?
Oh, happy to be here.
So, who are America's worst people?
America's worst people are the people who they know that in our culture today, all you have to do to advance is to claim some kind of victimhood, and it's always based on gender or race or sexuality. I think the ultimate example of that would have been someone like Jussie Smollett, and my only regret about what happened there was that he didn't wait until February 25th, which would have been coinciding with my book, to make his hoax hate crime claim. But, you know, you look at what happened with that. He wanted to get more famous. He wanted to get more money. This is according to Chicago police. And so he said, I was attacked by the privileged. And the privileged today are, it tends to be white male Trump supporters. He says, I was attacked by white male Trump supporters. And they did it because I'm black and because I'm gay. It turned out that was a complete lie. But the thing is, so many people in our society know that this is what you do to make advancements. You have to just make a claim of grievance, victimhood, oppression, based solely on the fact of, or on the basis of your gender, race, or sexuality.
And he did it at the expense of good, innocent people, because in doing so, he kind of showed, you know, all of Trump supporters are insane and crazy, and they just go out in the 2-degree weather, negative degree weather, actually, and just beat people in the streets.
Right.
And literally, there is so little animosity toward blacks and gays that he literally had to make it up out of thin air.
Right, particularly in Chicago.
Right. MAGA country, you mean?
Right, and what was interesting about his case from the start was when I heard it, I thought, I have heard this multiple times, and I document this in a chapter about hoax hate crimes, where it is about someone who wanted attention for something, draw attention to something, or simply get noticed for themselves, personal notoriety. They make the claim, in many cases before Jussie Smollett, it was actually Muslim women who were saying, my hijab was snatched off my head by, by white.
Was that the one
Trump
on the
supporters.
train? I think that's,
exactly,
yeah.
Yes, but there were actually, and I didn't know this until I started researching the book, I have at least probably 8 to 10 cases of the exact same story that happened around the nation. He was only the latest one.
You had the church that I believe someone drew a swastika on, maybe it was, and then it turned out to be the parishioner at the church. You had another church that burned down. It turned out to be the gay organ player at the church who did that. And so a lot of them end up just being completely made up out of thin air. It's almost as if these people want to be oppressed.
Oh, right. And it's not even, this isn't necessarily confined to Trumpism. Again, this is a culture book. It's not a partisan book. It's not a political book necessarily. It's a culture book, what's going on with our culture. And another example is when, and the New York Times was the one that made this case, and they tried to link it back to Trump, but saying that there was this rash of anti-Semitic attacks on cemeteries, and they linked it to another anti-Semitic thing with church or with synagogues. And it turned out that the one with the tombstones that were knocked over at different churches, it was a black man who was angry at his a best friend of his, and he was drunk one night, so he went over and knocked these things over. But the New York Times says, oh, this is the latest incident of Trump-inspired violence.
And they just made that up.
Oh yeah,
They just made
draw
it up.
the connection anywhere they can, because that's the dynamic that the other part of the book is the culture fascist. That includes the national media by and large. It's Hollywood, and where it all starts back is academia. What's going on in our colleges, and it is raging all over the college campuses in America. But no, again, that's the dynamic that animates Hollywood and the national media, is the privileged versus the victims.
So I want to get to Hollywood and academia in a sec, but the New York Times basically made that story up about the tombstone, yet, you know, they're the journalists, and you are some, you know, right-wing hack who's writing a partisan screed about, you know, simply how conservatives are actually victims. How do they square that away? Because I'm sure you're going to get, if you haven't already, you know, dragged through the mud for this book simply because you're touching the people you're not supposed to touch.
Right.
You're not supposed to touch Jussie, although that was so obvious that even, you know, universally he's kind of been condemned. But, you know, you're not supposed to touch Jussie. You're not supposed to attack or even reveal the Muslim girl on the train for being a liar.
Right.
You're certainly not allowed to talk about black people who aren't actually the victims of all of this stuff, and yet you are. And you're simply doing it on a fact-by-fact basis, and yet it's probably going to be smeared as some sort of hateful book.
I hope so. But no, the thing is that a lot of these things just simply disappear. You never hear about them again. You have to dig through local newspapers, archives to find out where this stuff actually ended up, because you'll hear about it all over the national media. I mean, no one had heard of Jussie Smollett outside of Empire viewers. I had never heard of him.
I had never heard of him either.
And then suddenly overnight, he is a celebrity, mega celebrity. And I don't think anyone the outpouring of support he got, he became a national household name overnight. Nobody who helped that happen, which by and large, it did involve the Democratic Party. You had the AOCs of the Democratic Party coming out and saying, "I'm so sorry this happened to you. This is hate under Trump. This is white supremacy on the rise under Trump." We find out that he lied about this whole thing, and yet never has anyone apologized. Some of them might have deleted their tweets, but we never saw an apology. So how do we square it away? Well, it just disappears. You're never supposed to think about it again because the national media completely stops covering it.
I mean, it was institutionalized. You had, what was her name, Kim Fox, who recused herself, but like didn't actually recuse herself. I mean, and that was the friend of Michelle Obama's. So it really went to the highest levels that it could. But you have this stuff permeating every single level of life. That is what it is. You have academia, you have Hollywood, you have the media. All of this stuff and all of these, alleged victims are given a microphone to grieve to air their grievances.
Exactly, no, and that's what it is. That's why I talk about the culture fascists, how they hijacked the country and elevated its worst people and privileged victims, because what they do is they perpetuate this whole concept of, just say that you've been oppressed, aggrieved, victimized by on the basis of your gender, your race, or your sexuality. There's an entire chapter based on or that's about the trans thing that's going on in America, the transgender. That whole thing is a complete victim complex. Over and over at the debates, by the way, the Democratic debates, and the Democratic Party is a big part of this book, even though it's not a partisan book, but over and over at those debates, you had someone saying, even I think Julian Castro said, we need to protect trans women who need abortion.
Right. I mean,
there is not
does
this
he even
rash
think
of
about
attacks.
what they're saying, or are they just trying to hit all the buzzwords?
You need to hit the buzzwords, and they know that this is not the Democratic Party anymore. It's the Social Justice Party. But again, they even talked about violence that's been committed against transgender women in particular, and then black transgender women, because they're just ticking off the boxes. Right. But again, I just want to say that that's also not real. I've got stats on that. Those are largely drug related, and oftentimes it's someone in their own family that did something because of a dispute that had nothing to do with gender.
That's fascinating. I actually didn't know that it was family members.
Oh yeah,
I knew that it was likely. I mean, they were
high risk lifestyles, prostitution,
and drugs and prostitution,
muggings.
But I didn't know about the families. So that's interesting. And then it's fascinating because you have all of these trying to check the right boxes, trying to check all of them, and then who's running away? It would appear as of right now, with the nomination, it's the oldest and whitest of them all.
Oh, right.
And, Julian Castro, who you mentioned, wouldn't he be the one to attract all of these Hispanics in Nevada?
So I actually just wrote about this earlier at the Washington Examiner. Is Bernie Sanders likely, it looks like, will be the social justice nominee of the Democratic Party. And how did he do this? He got through this by every day calling President Trump a racist. He said at a debate, and I think it was almost covered nowhere, that you would think that this would have been covered everywhere, but he said that this society, American society, is top-down racist. From the top down, we have a racist society. We've got a racist criminal justice system, racist healthcare system. So just pounding that message home over and over again, and then covering the rest of the bases, saying the way we equalize this out is we're giving power to everyone who claims grievance. That's what the reparations is about. That's what every single giveaway really is about. This idea that it's a socialist uprising, yes, that's a story, but we're looking at a social justice uprising.
I think that's exactly right. Last thing, Harvey Weinstein, he looks like he might be facing prison time. And he was just, I think it was sexual assault that they actually convicted him with.
Rape. I have a whole chapter in my book on Me Too, and I think we should never forget that. I hope he gets what he deserves, but this is what Me Too was created for. It was created for people like Harvey Weinstein, who were in power. There was overwhelming evidence that they were taking advantage of these young women, abusing many of these young women, and yet the Me Too movement has kind of gotten out of control, and it's all about the social justice thing. Believe all women was the Hillary Clinton issue, and there are many men who have suffered from this, mostly, by the way, on college campuses.
Yeah. And believe all women, unless that woman happens to be some sort of conservative, and then, maybe not so much. But in all of these instances, I think, they've, in most cases, taken something that is probably noble. You know, the Me Too movement
Right.
started off
Yeah.
as a noble venture, and then all of a sudden it gets corrupted, and anyone who, you know, now some college campuses have these rule books where you literally, if you make an advance that's not wanted
Right.
on a woman, she's allowed to say that was some sort of assault.
Or there's a consensual event. Sometimes it involves alcohol, but the next day, if
she doesn't-
someone they
yeah.
regret it,
Yeah.
and I
Sex
think
you
we've all
regret,
been there,
that's
we've all
considered-
been there,
that's
we've all had
considered rape.
regrets, and that's the standard now. Is that if you regret it, that's perfectly, you're perfectly allowed to say, I was taken advantage of, I didn't consent, or I had reversed consent. I'm retracting my consent in the aftermath, and yet still. But that's the thing, is you said it started out as a noble movement. Social justice corrupts anything and everything that it touches.
And it really does. And these awards, you know, they're held up on a pedestal and they're given awards.
Mm-hmm.
These awards that are on the cover of your book, they don't mean anything anymore because they don't, you know, they're given out to everybody, and they're given out to
Exactly.
the losers often,
Yep.
which is, you know.
That's the Hollywood chapter of my book, is just what are the awards, the Hollywood award ceremonies, if not tributes to victimhood, grievance, and oppression. You get everyone on stage who just gets to say, here's the victim that we need to pay attention to. Even in the case of Meryl Streep saying, this room is full
Right.
of victims, which are some of the most powerful people in the country. She says we're all victims.
Yeah, it's just an upside down world. Eddie, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. That was Eddie Scarry, everyone. Privileged Victims is his book. You can get it where books are sold.